Welcome back to the July edition of the Caritas Humanitarian podcast, bringing you humanitarian news and highlights from here and around the world, particularly the world of Caritas. I am Jasper, here again with Sally and Jill. Hello to you both.
Hi Jasper, hi Jill. Hey, this is Jill. Hey guys.
We are recording on the 1st of July, so we're working on information that's relevant up until today, but things are always changing in the humanitarian world, particularly the stuff we're going to talk about today. So if anything breaking, do make sure to check the news for updates and new facts and figures. So I might jump straight into it. Sally, there is a lot happening around the world. There always is. What are the big things that you're keeping an eye on at the moment?
Thanks, Jasper. So a little bit closer to home, last week I joined a conference/workshop up in Brisbane. It was at the University of Queensland and hosted by the Asia Pacific Centre for the Responsibility to Protect. And it was all about Australia's humanitarianism in a shifting global landscape. It was a really, really interesting workshop. There was approximately 25 of us in the room over 2 days. And they were experts across Australia, including academics, government representatives and practitioners from non-government organisations and the private sector. It was really, really interesting, very informative, and it was very, very interesting that I guess two of my big takeaways from it was everybody in the room agreed that we have existing humanitarian principles and international law in place, and due to the current global landscape being a time where there are more conflicts now than ever in history, that we need to uphold those principles and the law, and let's not look at changing them. There are practical things that everybody at different levels can be doing to ensure that we respect them. And this is to ensure the protection of not only humanitarian workers, but also then, therefore, civilians. The second big takeaway is that everybody in the room was very, very interested in the role of faith-based organisations in the humanitarian sector, and they truly believed that humanitarian organisations play a massive role in ensuring peace and diplomacy across the world. And yeah, there were some really interesting discussions, and I think it'll definitely be an area that Caritas Australia will continue to input and focus and, really understand what is our role to, ultimate peace in the world. So that was last week, super interesting. And I think it is today, the 1st of July, just come to the end of the financial year. So a couple of quick data points that we managed to pull together this morning. So the humanitarian team at Caritas Australia, throughout FY26, we supported 29 separate projects. That was across 20 countries with 26 different partners. And then looking out from that, last week there was an emergency over in Venezuela, which I think shook many of us. So over to you, Jasper, about what's happening in Venezuela.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. I think kind of jumping off that, it's hard to see the forest for the trees when you're in the thick of getting those projects across the line, and looking back and seeing how many of those we support over the year. It's great to see, and then to be hit with kind of what has happened now in Venezuela, obviously, has been a really big one here. So for people who aren't aware, there were two very large earthquakes, kind of historically large for Venezuela, 7.2 and 7.5 magnitude, so really high on that Richter scale, that struck the country last week on the 24th of June, so very close to the capital of Caracas and another port city of La Guaira. It was a very shallow earthquake, so close to the surface, which tends to mean that the damage is really high. The estimates, I think, as of today, again, this is one that will almost certainly be changing, and sadly so into the future. The estimates are at nearly 1,950 people killed, confirmed to be dead, but there are tens of thousands that are missing in the rubble. So it seems very likely that death toll will rise substantially. I've seen recently there is some satellite data that's been coming around that's saying that potentially up to as many as 50,000 buildings have been destroyed. And obviously what I guess that means in human terms is many, probably thousands of people will have been killed by that initial earthquake and the destruction of buildings, families displaced from their homes because they can't stay there anymore, but also the flow-on effects we tend to see from these kinds of emergencies, which things like disease outbreaks, people without access to food or livelihoods, particularly in areas where health and sanitation infrastructure has been destroyed and people don't have access to transport or things like that. The flow-on effects and the humanitarian cost of those things can really rise, particularly because Venezuela has been in an ongoing economic crisis for now. It's a decade and a half, and that has meant they already had really high humanitarian needs. So about nearly 8 million people were in need of humanitarian assistance before the earthquake. So things like food shortages, limited access to healthcare, no basic services, that has really further compromised the ability for people to survive and thrive after an earthquake like this. So it's a really horrible situation, but I guess what we have also been seeing as a lining to that is Caritas Venezuela, who has been based in Venezuela, born from the local church communities since the 1960s. They have been responding from the very beginning of the earthquake. So they've been opening churches up and buildings up to be emergency shelters for thousands of people with homes destroyed. They've opened up donation centres across, I think, every diocese in the country, or a large majority of them, to collect donations. And then in the initial days, hitting that really rapid donation of food and water and shelter goods for people to survive in those initial early days. And that means they've been able to coordinate with other bodies, but also pull on I think, close to 30,000 volunteers that they have across the country. So for us, it's been an incredible thing to see, I guess, the practical ramifications of Caritas as being these local organisations, and the people responding, having been there in the country. They are Venezuelan, they've been there for their whole lives, and when these emergencies hit, they're able to activate rapidly without the need to organise new partnerships in the country, because they're there to begin with, and so they can get to people in that very first, within hours, if not the first couple of days. And those are often the parts of a response that are the most critical for saving people's lives. So we're very thankful that they've been able to do that, and that people have been so generous in donating to the appeal that we launched here at Caritas Australia, I think within 24 hours. So the public has been incredibly generous, and thank you to everyone who's donated. That appeal is still open and the needs are really high, so it's very much still there for people to give to. So that's the brief overview of Venezuela right now. It's been a horrible thing to see, but the response has been quite incredible from the Caritas and other agencies that we've seen as well.
Yeah, we've already seen Caritas Venezuela have been putting out messages, thanking communities all around the world for standing in solidarity. And as we know, this is just the emergency phase, and there'll be a lot of assistance that's required in the coming weeks, months, and then unfortunately years.
I guess to kind of build from that deep dive into one of the countries we're operating in, Jill, we've had a bunch of really good feedback after our last podcast about people wanting to know more about a project of note that Caritas is funding and the human impacts of that. I believe that's what you're gonna dive us into here.
Yeah, thanks, Jasper. So I was going to talk about Yemen today. So Yemen is one of those crises that has been going on for a really long time. It's one of the largest protracted humanitarian crises in the world. Yemen's been in conflict and resulting economic instability from that conflict for more than 10 years now. And so across the sector, this is one of those crises that can fall away from the headlines, and we often call them forgotten crises. But again, the thing about Caritas is that they're so embedded in the community that Caritas continues to work in these environments, even when it's kind of not top of the headlines like Venezuela is at the moment. So in Yemen, Caritas has been supporting 4 healthcare facilities, and they've got a real great emphasis on obstetric care, and really working really hard to ensure that those facilities are fit for purpose and able to function. So the healthcare facilities they're working across service about 175,000 people. So I guess you can see the impact of those facilities having medications available, functional equipment, functioning buildings. The difference to that population is huge, to have that support to ensure those facilities are up to scratch. So what Caritas has been doing is they've been providing medication and equipment to those facilities. They've been doing outreach to pregnant women, helping to promote safe deliveries, helping those women understand what is available, providing referrals to those healthcare facilities. But above and beyond that, they've been playing a really important enabling role for those healthcare facilities in terms of ensuring that they have access to really basic critical supplies in terms of drinkable water, but also electricity and power. So Caritas has been trucking in water to facilities that otherwise would not have any access to drinkable water to ensure that that's available on a daily basis in those hospitals. So each month, Caritas has been providing 445,000 litres of water to these hospitals. That's about 180 backyard pools. On top of that, they've installed additional water tanks. They've been repairing bathrooms so that, really basic things like taps are functional. They've been focused on doing repairs for hygiene that kind of contribute to hygiene. So things like air conditioning bins, making sure the kitchens have doors, making sure that there was a comment in there about the roof in the emergency obstetric ward has been leaking. You can imagine how difficult that is in an emergency gynecological situation, and that's now been completely replaced. They've also upgraded the electrical network so that it meets safety standards, and they've installed power systems as well. So I guess for me, that was just a project of providing really practical support that makes a huge difference to a large population base.
Sally, you at one point were working in Yemen, and particularly in the medical field as well. I guess jumping off what Jill was saying there, and we see this across a lot of projects, that it's often things like repainting doors, fixing roofs. They are not huge, flashy, grand pieces of work, but they are really critical and life-saving. Was that, when you were in Yemen, were those the kinds of things that you see when those standards slip or when they're not able to be upkept, that it has kind of flow-on human costs?
Yeah, Yemen is a context. Unfortunately, we're still seeing that there are structures and buildings and then infrastructure that is directly damaged by the war and the conflict, so that needs to be repaired. But then also the governments don't have capacity at the moment as well to be doing any kind of maintenance. And we know that, structures, whether it's infrastructure, buildings, require maintenance to ensure that they are usable and are able to, the activities can continue. And, we need to also ensure that we're providing a safe and secure location for the civilians to be able to come, and also for the staff to be able to do that work safely and effectively as well.
I guess speaking of the kind of human impact that comes from those kinds of activities, Jill, I believe you were looking at some news we got from Caritas Ukraine over the last couple of weeks as well about the impact that the programming has had there on some people living through some pretty hard circumstances.
Yeah, so of course really, really difficult circumstances in Ukraine, but some really lovely stories of Caritas's assistance have been coming through. So one that stood out to me was a story about a family of 9. So Mother Irina, who has been living with a disability since she was a child. She's raising 8 kids on her own. They're from 3 years old to 18 years old. She's also got a beautiful dog, and she's been living right on the front line. So her situation for herself and her family has become increasingly untenable. They describe being able to hear the sounds of artillery and shelling every day. So you can imagine how terrifying that is for those children. But for Irina, with such a large family, with a pet, with a disability herself, evacuating her family is obviously no easy task. There's a lot of complications for anyone in those circumstances, but her personal circumstances in particular make that family really vulnerable. A Caritas staff member was made aware of this situation, was actually able to secure housing for Irina and her family in a safer location with a host family in advance, and they're actually also able to provide transportation. So they got a literal bus and were able to transport that family to a safer location all within a few days. And what they described was the children jumping with joy, physically jumping with excitement and joy at seeing this bus that was going to take them to a safe place where they'll also be able to access alternate support that Caritas is providing to displaced people in Ukraine, stuff like psychosocial support and care, safe spaces and activities where kids can be kids, they can play and connect with their siblings and parents in what feels like a normal way for a couple of hours, hygiene kits, food, and in some cases where it's needed, onward transportation to unite with family as well. So for me, that was a really striking story of, again, practical, immediate support to get people to safety. And one of the things that stuck with me was that support was actually provided by Caritas Maripol, who some people may recall back in 2022 at the start of the conflict, Maripol was really severely affected, and the Caritas office there was struck by tank fire, which tragically resulted in the loss of Caritas staff members as well as their families who were sheltering in the building. So I guess to me, it's just a testament to the threats that humanitarian workers face, but also that commitment to continuing to provide support right on the front lines in some of the most complex, difficult locations around the world.
Yeah, I think that's a really important story to come through, and I think we talked about this in previous episodes as well, about the idea that often aid workers are also victims of humanitarian crises at the same time, that they are not this kind of protected class that is separated, especially, when they are working for small Caritas offices that are embedded in local communities that they may have been there for their whole lives and their families are in, that they are also in harm's way, much in the same way that the people they are assisting are. And I think showing that, they are doing incredible work to kind of save people's lives and families and evacuate them from front lines, but also, sadly, and it shouldn't be to the cost of sometimes themselves and their colleagues. I think it's sobering, but it does show the fact that this work is, we are very lucky, I feel, to be able to support that and to let people know about it. Well, that's been it for another Caritas Humanitarian podcast for the month of July. Thank you so much for listening,
and thank you to Jasper. So this is your last podcast. So thanks for the start of the journey for this humanitarian podcast, and we will continue it in the future. So thank you.
Excited to see it fly, set the wings free and see it soar. So yes, thank you so much from the team here, and we'll see you next time.